took a cycle too, and I instantly just got I'm really bad at it. Anyways, I'll send you the little robot place. Try it out. Click the code. It's pretty straightforward. Like you can extract the folder files here, and then there's
Why is it like Chinese?
yeah, it's too fluffy.
It's almost like the basic. I did check it out. Like 7%. And my squad. Yeah, oh yeah, maybe not. Your name is why. Oh no, your name. I know he is right on.
You have a name?
I never really they're like, oh, I got it. Wait. Oh, there's people. We're being creatures. I'm Mars. They also heard about there's not another Mars. And that's like, they're always yeah. No, I was just, I wasn't the only character I knew remotely. I have ultimate, and then I always do like that with
So like,
my brother.
so like, I missed. I gotta keep my name on that. Don't you get? Oh, oh, oh! Got him.
I'm not Mario. No. Yes.
I was kidding. No. I missed. What do you have, Phil? That's 11 on you. My ball doesn't count. My ball doesn't count. It's always the last ball.
Good morning. Oh my God, Alex, you just did better today.
I'm not even.
Yes.
I don't want to.
I'm gonna go so fast. I know, dude, he's like
Is something wrong?
Look at it.
I've seen it. You need something.
Oh, yeah.
I saw this great. Sorry, that could be. You have like a Hey, I like you.
Your head is like this way.
No,
It's
no, like
hilarious. You were like so sunburned. You're just like, you couldn't like.
Stop anyways.
It's more better. It's so much more easier too. So much more better.
What about you? Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
Oh no. You already ruined the lot.
Should have went in my head.
No, I didn't know you were getting right now.
No, and I'm like, I was.
She'll be up later.
I think I that back
So
so
secret.
What do you have, Caleb?
Yeah.
Brought it back out.
And I like lost all the motivation for like 2 days. I couldn't like go in there. I just saw that so hard that I couldn't grab for like 20
Oh, yeah, Zelda's back too.
It's the first
What do you have? Oh, how did I fix that?
I don't know any of this.
Michaela. Child.
He's a little child. I'm really worried.
Yo. That hit.
You don't even know how to do that.
No, I missed. We were quite fast today, though.
GG.
Hey Alex!
What?
Are you using your bamboo bridges?
What?
Are you using bamboo?
You know it all the time.
What?
Holy cow, right?
And then you're in.
I'm gonna get out by house.
Just wait your turn.
Make sure you hit the second goal line behind you. That's the lowest. I should have just let it roll. Lower. Lower. Leave me. It's lower.
I forgot.
No, I only like them as a
People just keep on like that. No, I should have put the tail you should go off. I'm guessing right now I'm thinking out. No!
Yeah, it's only the
I'm
right.
so lucky that didn't fall. Try to get. Listen to it. Don't stick it on me, please. Don't do it.
I started to do that.
Oh, perfect. Here we go. I do. Like the first, whoever came up with the song. I want you to win. I want you to enjoy your heart. How do you do that?
Oh, I missed.
Because it's just and when I was studying my house, he's gonna like he's like say that again. Wait for it.
Dang it!
Oh, I'm last.
Hey, you play?
Yeah.
Okay, we're done.
I wanted to kill, but
No, I think you're gonna open it.
you last.
I don't know where it is. I'm last thing anyway.
I should like take a picture.
Yeah.
Watch
I don't know where it is. Oh, she's done. Yeah, it's out of 10.
Why did I always do that?
Couldn't do that. I need to play it. Wow. Nearly killed.
Hold up, I have my
Morning, boys.
Good morning. Good morning.
Or didn't.
Yeah. Didn't get it.
Yeah, just like the way.
figured out that you got like.
I'm still going with it. I don't even know. I'm not trying to.
I know.
My turn.
I know.
No.
Oh, Alex.
Yeah.
I figured he's like stuck in his pocket.
I hate when it does
I got my dough. I forgot that's my
Oh.
Oh, yes, that's
Oh, splash dodge. If I should, if I didn't shoot that. Oh, yeah.
You see that?
Oh, I missed.
Cool.
Yeah. Actually, it does.
Cool.
I think I'm now
Oh, okay then.
I'm just gonna watch this one.
No, that's you.
Oh, yeah.
Are you out?
No.
I did like a spin down or something to his face. No, that was just
I know, I just remembered that.
he maybe that was the jokes.
How did you see? Yeah, it is.
Travel video.
I probably the worst.
It's easy.
That's like
Probably my
No, you need to let it go.
I went.
I gotta take off my jacket.
right in the jaw. My radio might bust it, but I don't care about it.
I was skating my
My name is I'd probably be
Making sure it's
no, we're winning. Oh my god.
my hat's not helping with my hair.
What? Oh, go. I ran all the way over here on that.
Watch the ball.
Oh, dang it, why don't you live here?
Sorry, Alex.
No, I'm ashamed. Why did they read?
Go my hat.
I never noticed how long your hair
I know, I do.
is.
Oh. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Anyway, so I was standing in front of
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just happy I got 11.
Oh.
it was like a
What?
That was so lucky.
but anyway, so this guy came out.
Look at it, feels like a fan,
I believe it.
He's like,
Harder.
telling my friends.
One, one.
I'm like,
I was so loud. So it is.
he's like, hey, there's a dead body. What?
I'm out of it.
And then like later, he went over to the Hawkins place and started like fighting.
Yes, thank you. I'm so happy right now.
As soon as I applied, I got that.
Then he went to.
Yeah, that's what we did. And he was like,
Wait.
I have nothing.
And he's like,
I'm just thinking, how many games have we played?
this guy.
A couple? How many songs have we? I don't remember.
Yes, thank you, Nate. Alright, everyone against Nate.
No. Jinx. Nate is not friend. I'm doing good. Why?
Now you can.
yeah, it hit it.
Like,
No.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
That's like
this is shoot.
So, my grandma, you know,
Oh,
no.
yeah, I took it apart and up the amp. I like put like it had like two AA batteries. Yeah, I had like two AA batteries.
Yes.
And it was like so charged. But during that, I lost myself 7 times.
Oh my god. That was almost a hand.
So it's not like
No, it was
Yeah, I did.
didn't
no.
Usually like
Not working out.
I feel like it's only bad. We have.
In the
And then I get regained. And then I'm running off.
Yeah, so like when things went really bad.
he knows what
No,
he's doing.
what's your Okay.
Oh, yeah, I love
No. My dad came to my room. And he was like, and I was like, the reason.
I don't know. I still got that cool shot.
where are you out? Are you done?
We should have last. He's like,
one time I brought a
Why am I always
Facing upside down, other kids in it. Oh, this is sick, man.
so yeah.
wait, so so
I couldn't do anything about that. It's too many bullets.
I think I remember.
Like, I can't know what to say.
Anyway, but so
Yeah. What a cunning
I have more skill.
He's entirely.
So,
Yes, it did. I know. Right? 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 It's just a minute. All right, everybody, grab a white chair. If you don't have your own Bible, grab one off the shelf. No, I win. I think I just played Katie's chicken and I lost.
I changed things up too. Those are new songs there. Sorry.
These the new ones?
Yeah.
Both managers. Which one's best?
Put my drink back on.
Hey, where's Sharon?
I don't know. Not really all the time.
Silly girl.
This is called a How you doing? It's like think about it. Wait. How you doing?
Do you want to by chance play with me Wednesday? If you could play, that'd be awesome. If you're electric and all right. We will. You're gonna, as soon as he's done putting them in, you're gonna run over there like a little mouse and grab them.
Why mouse? And then
A
there's gonna
mole?
be a mouse
You're
trap.
gonna run over there like a rabbit.
So
Prance
no,
like
I'd
a
rather
deer.
run like a cat. Has a coat and like,
Well, aren't you just so smart?
rabbit running, like not hopping.
All right, I put them in.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
Hey Seth, can you turn the lights off? Just leave on switch. Three.
Off the lights. Get these lights off. Why is there so many cables?
What song did I pick? I forgot. Okay. Yeah, I forgot. I was meant to forget.
I know, seriously. Me too. Why? I tried to do myself.
Hey, we got sound. All right. Let's pray and we'll get started with worship. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time to come before you. Praise your name, lift you high. Pray that you bless this time of worship. In your name, amen. Let's stand for this first song. What do you turn? Water you turn into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. None like you. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God's greater. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. Oh. In darkness. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. Our God's greater. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? What could stand against? Oh, our God is greater. Our God is stronger. Oh, God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. Just our voices. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. Oh. What can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of
This is all my righteousness, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other founts I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. And here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake became born. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Lord, help me know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. Lord, help me know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. Lord, help me know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. And here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me.
Heavenly Father, you are worthy to be praised. Everything about you is so incredible. We thank you for being such an awesome, amazing God and revealing yourself to us every day. Thank you for this time of worship and learning. I pray that you would open our hearts and minds to hear your word and bless this time in your house. In your name, amen.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Sonia. If you guys have a Bible, open it up to the book of Mark, chapter 8. If you don't have a Bible, go grab one off the shelf. Good morning. How are you guys?
Oh, turn 2. Yeah, okay.
Are you thinking to Mark?
You see, like, the number 2.
Yeah, because that's how you say that.
It sounded like you were saying.
You wouldn't say 2 Chronicles.
I mean, you
I wasn't sure. No, I thought you said it in the order. Open up to Mark 2, chapter 8. I'm like, there's a second part.
Like Mark 2?
Yeah.
He forgot to think.
As in
Yeah.
like Jaws 2 or Terminator 2?
Yeah, Mark.
Oh, okay. The
Aquaman
sequel?
Yeah. it's a
Aquaman 2?
sequel.
Okay, that makes some small amount of sense. Sure.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
A small amount is enough.
Small amount.
You know?
All right, so, boys in the back, you guys are talking all through worship. Please don't talk all through Bible study. Otherwise,
We'll have to sue you.
there's other dry roofs. You should be here for God. If you're not here for God,
Then we'll sue you.
I don't know what the point is.
Or not.
Because I'm not worth it.
You're here for the
I'm not that
yeah.
good.
Anyone want to be sued by Nathan? He really wants to sue someone.
We're in chapter 8 today. We're going to be picking up at verse 22, so it's about halfway through the chapter. That's page 837 if you haven't found it yet in one of our borrowed blue Bibles. If you don't have a Bible, get one.
I totally don't have a
orange?
Bible.
That's good. That's good. There's very few words on that orange.
I totally don't have a Bible.
Are you
Came
here with
for the
Kate? Or
oranges.
are you just here?
Jesus did. First time you're blind.
First time here?
Oh, I forgot to get one.
Yeah, he's exchange student.
Oh, okay. Does he read English well?
He speaks English okay.
Okay, cool. Can you help him find his page? Okay. 837?
John 8.
No, Mark 8.
Mark 8.
Yep.
Mark,
That's
John,
page
same name.
837.
Yeah.
Same name, different
Cool.
pronunciation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we don't need that on anymore.
Just like.
But we want. You just turned off our beautiful scenery.
I know, it was lovely.
Why?
Misty Mountains. Alright, so, today as we look into chapter 8, I just want to give you a quick backstory. Last week in chapter 8, or not last week, does anyone know what last week was?
No, I wasn't here. I wasn't here. No, we did.
I haven't been to Sunday service.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Jesus, like, he fed a bunch of people again, but less
I'll
of them.
just.
But less people.
But, and there's
Yeah.
7 baskets left, I know that.
Oh, good job, there
The
was
time
some
before that,
baskets.
there's 12.
I could just read the like headlines.
Oh, that is right
back
there.
from
Yeah,
Okay.
he fed
Ah.
4,000 people
So-
last week.
Good job. Alright, so he fed 4,000 people. That's not actually what I was going to pick on. I was going to pick on the end of last week. The end of last week, he turns to the disciples because they're still questioning whether or not he can feed them right after he just fed 4,000 people. And he says, are you guys blind? Are you guys deaf? Do your eyes work? Do your ears work? Have you been seeing the miracles I've been doing? Have you been listening to the things I've been teaching? I want to point this out because I find it highly ironic that right before the 4,000, right before Jesus pegs him to the wall with those questions, he healed a deaf man. And this week, as we start out in chapter 8, verse 22, we're going to see him heal, guess,
A blind.
a blind man.
A mute.
So I love that. Right in between healing a deaf guy, right in between that and healing a blind guy, he questions his disciples, are you blind? Are you deaf? It's a rhetorical question. And I love that in its own little vacuum of last week, the rhetorical question is kind of, I know you're not rhetorical. It's like of course you're not. But actually, if you look at it in the context of the week before and this week, it becomes rhetorical in the sense of, because if you are, I could fix that. I could help you. But to show us they're blind or deaf in a traditional way. They're going to show us they're blind and deaf in a different way. Yes.
Because I was all like, because when you said, are you blind or deaf? I guess he was using that in a metaphorical way.
Yes. And that's what we're going to get to. We'll get there eventually, but yes, absolutely. All right, so Nathan, start us out with verse 22.
Can we start over there?
We always
No.
start. We need to stop saying that.
No.
I hate this.
I just like this corner, that's all.
We need to stop
I
saying
remember the one time
Cool
we
people
did
sit in
sit
this
over
corner.
there.
that. Yeah, anyway,
We
awesome.
started
Everybody
over
love it so
Oh,
much
that's
more.
weird. It's almost like I pick on you guys.
Almost like
It's
it.
almost like that.
Almost like
It's a little bit like that.
Yeah.
If you squint at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
Hey Nathan, start us off with verse 22.
Just 22, like you don't want to make me read anymore.
Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll come back around. You'll be like the only guy who reads twice.
When they arrived at
Yeah,
that place, some people brought a blind man to Jesus and they begged him to touch the man and heal him.
Bethsaida, by the way.
Jesus took. Wait. We're gonna talk. Something.
I'm trying to listen.
Jesus took the blind man by the hand, and he led him out of the village. Then he spitted on the man's eyes and laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?"
Then he spitted.
The man looked around. Yes, he said, I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around.
Okay, pause. I just wanted them three to read. That's it.
Oh man, they didn't.
Now this is pretty weird on a few counts. Now, first off, Jesus heals a person, and then he asks him, "Did it work?" Not exactly. I mean, he says, "Can you see?" And I find that interesting that Jesus had to check his work, but you'll kind of see why in a second because.
I think he did it for the disciples.
Well, let's talk about it a little. Let's talk about it a little. So he says, "Can you see?" And the guy says, not very clearly, "I see trees walking around." Now, honestly, if you squinted really hard, or you borrowed someone's glasses that weren't your prescription, or you were crying and had tears in your eyes, I don't care what you do, people don't look like trees.
No.
Just really buff.
They don't look like trees.
This guy's just seeing Narnia.
Not unless everyone's wearing like really weird coats.
You never know.
You
Maybe
know,
they were having
or
like a
has
costume party.
really big hair.
Maybe they really
Like
buff
the
guys.
like the
Oh, I know it.
like
Like
the
a
little
cartoon.
like the little brother in the Christmas story, except all his coats are brown.
Yeah, like that.
Oh yeah.
Like there's no real good reason why everyone should look like trees. However, there is something interesting here. It doesn't mention whether this man was born blind or not. And if he was born blind, this actually makes a lot of sense. Because there's part of your brain that's in charge of visual memories, and it's not the same as your other memories.
Because
Each part of your brain specializes, but each part can actually hold a memory. Not every part, but the big parts can. And so you can have scent-based memories, where you smell something you've smelled before and you go, "Oh, I know what that is." And that's not in the big giant memory center of all memories. That's in the smell center. That part of your brain can actually house a memory. Likewise, over in the visual side of your cortex, you house your visual memories. And so we've actually discovered some things through time, through experience. Doctors have figured out, psychologists have figured out, neurologists have figured out that we didn't used to know. So there's one instance where this man was losing the functionality in his visual cortex. So he'd been able to see his whole life, okay? He had always been able to see, and he still could see, his eyes still worked. But the parts of his visual cortex that were going out were removing visual memories from his head, even though he could remember other things. So he could remember his wife's name, he could remember the way his wife smelled,
but not what she looked like.
but not what she looked like. She did not look like his wife to him because he did not know what that would look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing. So to give you a for instance, one day the psychologist goes to his house and he hands the man a glove and he says, "Identify this. What is this?" And the man holds the glove and he turns it over a few times and he goes, "Well, it's some kind of container. It's small though, so it could probably, perhaps it is a change purse. And each of these long, I don't know what you would call them, perhaps outpouchings, small pouches upon the pouch, perhaps there for holding different size coins. And you press the coins down into them, and they arrange themselves in rolls."
Correct.
You guys have seen coin rolls, right?
Yeah.
that's what he thought when he saw the fingers on the glove. Now later, he saw someone put the glove on. And he immediately, like you couldn't remember a certain person's name, and then 10 minutes later you did, he went, "Ah, it's a glove, of course." Why couldn't I think of that? That's really strange. Likewise, one day he's in the psychologist's office, and he stands to leave. It's the end of the appointment, and his wife had been sitting at the back of the room like the whole time. And as he gets up to go, he goes to reach for his hat. And seeing his wife's head, and his brain knowing that hats and heads are related,
He goes and puts the hat on
I
his
kid
wife's
you not,
head.
he grabs his wife's head and tries to pick it up and place it on his own head. Now, he was not forceful because he only used the amount of force his arm remembered to use for picking up a hat, which isn't that much force.
Unless you got like.
And then he
steel
goes
And
to
at this point, his wife is completely used to it. She gets it. She's not offended. She just wants to try and help him live his life as best she can. So she's not hurt by this. But it was strange that his wife's face did not help him remember, this is not a hat. This is your wife. But his vision could tell that it was a head just enough to make him think, I found what I'm looking for. Because he was looking for a hat. Likewise, he would go down his hallway at his house and he would see pictures of his family. And he couldn't tell who any of them were. He didn't know who anyone in the pictures were. But if he saw big teeth and he saw a broad chin, he could go, "That's my brother." Because he remembered his brother had big teeth and a broad chin.
But that could be anyone.
It could have. You hung up another picture with big teeth and a broad chin, he would have thought it was his brother. He would have had no clue that wasn't his brother.
Female, and he would have been, "That's my brother."
He would have. Oh no, it gets weirder still. The psychologist flipped on the TV once, and there was a scene from an old black and white movie playing, and it's this man and woman, and it's like they're dating and they're fighting, and then they make up and they kiss, and the man was terribly confused because he couldn't even tell what gender the two people on screen were because they had muted the show. And without hearing the voices, he couldn't tell which one was a girl, which one was a boy. He couldn't even tell what their emotions were. He couldn't tell when they were being romantic or when they were fighting or what was going on. And when they kissed, he was surprised. Because his brain hadn't set him up with, this is a man, this is a woman, his brain hadn't set him up with, they've stopped fighting, now they're falling back in love. Nothing was clear to him about who they were and what was going on because all he had to go on was the visual. If they'd turned the volume back on, then he would have been able to follow it. He would have been able to tell what was going on. And so this man, all he did was suffer some kind of illness in his frontal cortex. That was all it took. Other people have had similar symptoms, and they were actually closer to the person we're looking at today. There was actually a case where a man who was born blind due to some problems with his optic nerve was able to have surgery, repair those damages, correct that, and eventually his sight began to return. And he went back to the doctor and he told him how hard life was now that he had his sight. Because he was so athletic and so fit and so good at sports while he was blind, he had actually learned how to play all of his favorite things. He learned how to keep up with people.
That's why I
Was
fall.
it behind or in front? Where was that?
Behind.
Oh,
That's
some good
racist
surround
stuff.
sound right there. He'd actually learned how to play blind. Once he could see, it got in the way because he didn't have object recognition built into his head. He couldn't look at something and tell what it was off the top of his head like we can. He had to
Wait.
focus on it and think about it and process it and
Did he want to be
examine
blind again?
the...
They close your eyes when you're running.
No, well, that's literally what he had to do. See, one of his favorite sports was skiing. And he actually
how
learned to
do you
ski
do
blind. No, he learned.
Wow.
He got good. He could do double black diamond and all that. He would have a guide skier. And the guide skier would tie a short piece of rope to the back of his belt, and he would tie the same rope to the front of his belt. And when he would feel the guide skier pull left, he would ski left. And by how hard he pulled, that's how far he turned. And the skier in front didn't have to think. The skier in front just skied. And by the tugs on the belt, the blind man could ski. He could tell where he should go. But as
Like
soon
to
as he
avoid
tried to ski
objects?
with his sight, he suddenly had many things to deal with, like how big these mountains were, how scary those ski runs were, and
This
how
is quite a
narrow
road.
the path was between the trees. These were all things he never had to deal with before. Just recognizing one tree to the next was very difficult. because he could recognize a forest after much concentration. But that did not mean he could then glance at a tree and know it was a tree. He had to start over. Every time he saw a tree, he had to stare at the tree and focus on the tree and think about the tree. And what does it have? It has branches. Okay, it's probably a tree. And the next tree he saw, he'd have to do the same thing over again because he had no memory built in of what trees were. Isn't that strange? He knew what trees smelled like. He knew what trees felt like. He didn't know what trees looked like. And so this starts to give us some idea of what this man might be dealing with. Jesus opens his eyes, he can see, and he says, "Can you?" And Jesus just opened his eyes. He knows he can see. Why would he ask him, "Can you?" Because he's checking up on his patient. How is your sight? And the man says, "I can't see clearly. What I see are trees walking around." Now that's interesting because the walking around thing actually matches with what we know scientifically. What we know scientifically is that when someone gains their sight back, or they suffer damage to the prefrontal cortex, and they lose those vision memories, or they never had them, that the action memory and what an action looks like is actually separate. So the original man I told you about, who didn't know what a glove was, didn't recognize his wife, he was actually a music teacher at a music college. And he was very, very good, but he couldn't read sheet music anymore because he couldn't remember what the notes looked like. So anything he remembered, anything he knew, from memory, by ear, he could play because he knew how it sounded. He still had an amazing singing voice. He could still sing. And he would have all of his students sitting in class, and if he was talking for a while and they stopped moving, he wouldn't know who any of them were. It was like being in a room full of strangers. But if they fidgeted, he knew who they were because he could remember what their fidgets were. Those were actions. Likewise, if they started playing music or singing, he knew exactly who they were because he knew how they played. He knew what they sounded like. And so when this man says, "I see trees," he's guessing. What the heck are all these things? Bunch of weird up and down bits. There's a few side to side bits. But they're walking.
They have branches.
That's not right. I see trees that are walking, Jesus. That can't be right. So then we get on to our fourth verse. It's not actually verse 4. It's actually verse 25.
You can do it. I believe in you. Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly.
Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home."
Okay, pause.
What?
Jesus works another miracle. He says, "Can you see?" Kind of. I see trees walking around. Puts his hands back on him. Heals him more. And this second healing is extreme. We talked about this a little bit with the deaf guy a while back. But when he heals him the second time and he allows him to see clearly, what he is doing, guys, is amazing. He is giving this man visual memories he never had. He is filling in the gaps. Now our God, our Creator, can do that. Why? Well, because he's outside of time. He could literally, I don't know how he's doing it, but he could, you want to go comic book on me, he could reach into an alternate reality where this guy had been born with sight and borrow the memories and put them in this head. All the memories he would have accrued, all the memories he should have if he could have seen this whole time, all those visual things he learned locked in now, he looks around and he sees clearly. Oh, that's people. That's a person. Those are hands on the ends of those arms. You want to know something really weird about your own visual memories? Your nose. Your nose has a fixed orientation to your eyes. And so few of us, unless we have like photographer parents, few of us are acquainted with what our nose looks like from other angles, but the one we see in a mirror. 95% of the time you see your nose in a mirror. And likewise, when you look at a picture of yourself, you're usually looking at the camera. Usually. There are those photos of you where you're not looking at the camera, and your head is at some side angle, and if you look at those photos, you will notice your nose looks wrong. You felt your nose before. You know what shape it is, don't you? Don't you?
It's a circle.
If I gave you Play-Doh right now and you weren't allowed to touch your nose right now, could you make a model of your nose?
No.
Most people could not.
The nose
They do
knows.
not actually know what their nose looks like. They know what their nose looks like from here. That's it. That's all they know.
I could make your nose.
If I showed you a perfect replica of your nose, you likely would not recognize it until I turned it straight at you. And then, there it is. That's your nose. Does that make sense? Your memory works this way. You do not have a proper memory of your nose. You have a fixed, memorized version of your nose in your head. And that's all you have. Just that one version. That's the nose you know from straight on. And this is why visual memories are so important. So important because you only have what you've stuck in there. And Jesus just reaches into this guy's head and goes, here you go. I'm giving you the complete set. The whole Encyclopedia Britannica of vision memory. It's all yours. Just plops it into this guy's head. That is ridiculous because we can't do that still. We don't think we'll ever be able to do that. We don't even to this day, scientifically, as the human race, we don't fully understand where memories are stored in your brain. We think it's in the synapses between the neurons, like in the links between, that perhaps when a neuron chooses to connect to cell A instead of to cell B, that somehow locks in a memory, almost like a 1 and a 0, that which direction the neuron goes is somehow the memory. We don't even know how that works. We're not 100% sure. We're kind of trying to figure it out. We've got to the point now where we're actually growing brains in test tubes. We've got like little millimeter ball-sized brains, like the tip of a pen. We've got brains about that big we've grown. We take adult cells, we chemically get them to become, not brain cells, stem cells again. Once they become stem cells again, we use even more chemicals to then tell them, you need to be a brain cell. Obviously, you should totally be a neuron. And then we stick a bunch of those neurons in a little tiny test tube and we give it a bunch of nutrients and eventually it grows these little tiny brains, like these teeny tiny things. But they're not full brains. It's not like a miniature brain. It's like a brain seed.
I'm gonna start putting those in
It's like what a baby would have when it was, a couple weeks old. This is a teeny tiny, almost brain. But we're working on it. We'll get better and better and better. And what's cool about this is if we want to test stuff on brains, but we don't want to kill someone in the process, we could test it on a test tube brain. That's pretty cool. And then if, this experiment doesn't go well, oh well, no one lost their brain for the sake of your experiment. That's good. Yeah, the poor test tube. Poor test tube. He lost his brain. So we're making a lot of progress, but so far, guys, if we want to do this kind of stuff, fixing bad memories, like helping someone with PTSD, we don't have a surgery for that. You can't go in Phil Coulson style with like space lasers and try and fix the way your brain remembers things.
Oh yeah.
We don't have that. I don't think we're ever gonna have that. Why? Well, because the pathways in our brain are more complicated than our galaxy. I'm not messing with you. Just your one brain.
What about the universe, huh?
Well, the universe is a little harder to measure. Your one brain is more complicated than our whole galaxy's network of stars. That's pretty crazy. And there's a lot of brains. Each and every one of them is that complex. Even broken ones are that complex. That's why. I think I called on you last. I'm going to go Kate first and come back to you, okay?
Yeah, I have a couple things.
'Kay.
One, I'm still stuck on the one thing I had before. That if the guy thought that his wife's head was the hat, wonder what he'd do with the hat.
Put it on his head.
I mean, the actual hat.
Oh, give it a kiss.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
And also, so.
Walk out of the room arm in arm with it? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Hi, honey. How you doing?
Also, I forgot what I was gonna say.
That's good.
I like that one.
Actually,
That's a good one.
I also
know that
thought
feel,
that
bro. I know that feel.
maybe that the visual area is actually definitely probably way different from the other areas because normally if you think of something, if you think of one thing like let's say cookies, I guess if you had ones and then when you see it again, maybe whatever, like let's say you see the smell of it, then you might think of the first time you ever tried one.
Yeah. Well, and it gets stranger than that because a lot of us, when we think just thoughts, we think of them visually. Some of us are more auditory. Very, very few of us think in smells. But most of us dream visually. Well, the first man I mentioned who lost his ability to have, sight-based memories, he didn't dream visually anymore. He dreamt in concept. So he would awake and he would remember the idea of, I felt sick, I was being chased, and in the end I got away. What did the person chasing you look like?
I don't know.
Who?
What do
The
you
one who
mean?
was chasing you. You were being chased. Yes, I was being chased. Who was chasing you?
What do you mean? I just had
That's
the
a
feeling
nonsense
of being
question.
chased.
There was never anyone to turn around and see because he was never visually there. Isn't that weird? So he didn't dream in sight anymore. He dreamt in concept. Very, very strange. Yeah, Summer.
So I'm thinking that I guess that if you're like born blind, I've heard it blind or deaf, it's actually harder for you to learn things because when you're born blind, you don't know what anything looks like, so you can't like tell. When you're a baby, if you are born with sight and hearing, the things you hear when you're a baby, you have more brain cells and more
Roaming.
thoughts.
More
So
multiplication of brain cells.
you have more thoughts going through your brain. When you grow up, as you grow up, those brain cells that you had when you were a baby go away. They just, after a bit, the things
No,
that you
it's
remember.
a simplification, but it's true, actually.
It is.
The teenage years are the brain shrink years. Your brain starts to figure out what do you like, what do you do often, and what do you not like, and what do you not like to do. And anything you do often, it will keep on into your adult years. And anything you don't do, anything you don't practice, anything you don't try, your brain will start to just give up on. Don't need that anymore. And so typically someone who quote unquote likes math, I don't think that's real. Yeah, you're not real. I'm just kidding. If you like math and you use it a lot in your teenage years, you'll find math is actually quite easy as an adult. And one of the reasons so many adults don't like math is because they allowed themselves to not practice it that much in their teenage years. And no joke, math is harder as an adult if you didn't practice it, use it, think about it as a teenager. So one thing I did a lot as a teenager that I'm still quite good at, math-wise, is geometry stuff. Measuring stuff, wood shop, all those kinds of things where you're physically dealing with the numbers out in front of you. I'm still really good at that. But I didn't like algebra that much, and I really didn't like calculus. So now that I'm an adult, algebra, calculus type math, that's a lot harder for me. And it's purely because you use it, you get to keep it. You don't use it, you'll lose it. So during the teenage years, very important to use your brains in all the ways you hope to use them as an adult. Never put anything off. Never think, I'll just learn another language when I'm older. No. Learning languages as an adult is darn hard. One of the hardest things you can do. Learn a language now. Start as young as you possibly can. No matter how basic and bad your understanding of the language is, the younger you start, the better you'll be. 1,000%. Like, for sure. Okay, so. We got 2 hands. Okay, yes.
So let's say for like about a month while you say you just got your sight back and you're trying to learn things for about a month, the only type of cookie you saw was the star-shaped sugar cookie. Then the next month you start seeing heart-shaped sugar cookies.
Sure.
I can say that. Would you necessarily be confused that it's a cookie?
Ooh, good
Since
question.
it's heart-shaped and it's not the shape that you've seen for the past month.
Depending on the person and depending on what else you're going through, yeah, it really could cause you issues. Visual recognition is tricky. There's no 2 ways about that. But I'm not a doctor. So to give you an absolute yes, no is not really my realm.
today.
That's not really where I live.
Popular.
All right, yeah, Nate.
So
Another one.
Don't shush. Nobody asked for
It's
your
R2D2
opinion.
Which R2D2?
Yeah.
Let's see. Is he password his phone?
No, I'm not.
Doesn't.
What are the
Oh.
notifications?
Delete
Call
the
somebody.
cow.
Call somebody.
Or her.
You have some if this then that's. That's it.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna turn it off.
Okay, it does that.
I was gonna text someone. I thought it'd be hilarious. It's just some if then that's.
You could
Okay.
I'll get it.
Being
Text.
dark alley in 10 minutes.
All right. Sorry. Back to Nate.
So are miracles that Jesus did on other people, does that still give the other person free will?
Ooh, very good question. Yeah, the instance here is probably the closest you could get to saying it doesn't, because it says that other people brought the blind man to him.
Yeah.
But in most of the instances, the person wanted to be healed.
Yeah.
So they're asking for a healing. He's giving them a healing. You also have to keep in mind, God's not going to go in there and fiddle with like everything when he gives you a gift of visual memories.
Yeah.
He's careful. He's not going to try and change your personality just because, oh, well, I'm already under the hood. Why not? There's no point to that. He's fulfilling a request. You know, you want to be able to see, is that working for you? No, it's not. I didn't think so. Let me go the extra mile. Let me give you what it takes to use those eyes now that your eyes actually work.
Okay.
Because the eyes are like, they're about a half the problem right there.
And then there's this other instance where this woman, she played music like a lot of her life, and then as she got older, she became deaf, but she was still able to play music because of the vibrations that it made on the ground.
Right on.
That's
That's
what
awesome.
what's his name did who wrote for release. He
Beethoven?
would attach a metal bar to the piano that he would bite down on.
So you could
So
feel
the
the
vibration.
music.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Yes.
Earlier you were talking about alternate realities. Would an alternate reality have an
When was the
alternate
last
God?
time that came up? Sorry, Ultimate what?
Would an alternate reality have an alternate God?
Ooh, good question.
But we do have
That would depend entirely on the definition of the word reality. Because if you define reality as something that God created, then no. If you define reality as something inclusive of God, then by definition, yes. But that's purely a construct. That's not reality.
Well,
Yeah, I know.
it's
a poor kid.
Yeah, Kate.
Yeah, so I would think it's better to have the eye issue where you can't see, you've never been able to see, than to have it where you can't think visually anymore. Because I think it's possible, it's way easier to fix a broken eye than a broken mind. Because I think it would be able to, if they figured out the.
I feel like
what goes
easy is
to
the wrong word, but
Yeah.
doable.
Yeah, it's doable.
It's doable.
Or I think they could figure out if they studied the eye, what goes through the nerve, and maybe possibly reconstruct it.
Yeah, well, we
But
can
then-
even do
but-
surgery on the eye itself. I mean,
and
we've gotten
and
pretty good.
if that was possible, if that was doable, then when someone does it, then they can actually learn to look at stuff. While if you got the brain damage, you couldn't fix it.
Yeah. Well, and we've found in certain types of brain damage, even if we don't understand how the brain works exactly, we can still help the brain out. So you look closely at the brain, we don't necessarily know how a memory gets stored, but we go, oh look, his visual memory's messed up. Well, we know which part of the brain does that. We've figured that out, like which section. So we'll go in there and we'll look at it. Oh look, there's a giant tumor. Oh! And then, you remove the tumor and the brain may actually heal itself. And so that's where we do have some ability. We've been able to figure out, well, this isn't normal. Let's try and remove the abnormality.
Yeah.
But then the healing is totally up to the body, totally up to what God's going to do in that person. We
Yeah,
don't
that's
have
what
any
you
way to
want.
say, come on, brain, you can do it. Like, we just have to kind of,
Yep, that's what you want
Wait.
to. Because
I have a
in the tumor, basically with the tumor, during when it's in the brain, it will hurt you. But if you remove it, it has a possibility to fix itself. If you leave it until too late, then it could completely mess up the brain. Like
yeah.
my dad had a
permanently.
friend,
You know,
had an old friend that had a tumor, but they didn't notice it until too late, and I think it exploded.
Hmm.
And I think that gave him like a memory loss. He got short-term memory loss, and I think he had a little. That kind of gave him a little bit of a, like a, what is it? It's the disorder that
There's a
makes
lot of
you.
those.
I don't remember what the disorder is. I don't know.
Okay.
It like says it removes some functionality in your brain
Gotcha.
where you're. Yeah, I don't remember what it is.
Okay. We gotta get back to reading because we're running out of time. Is it quick?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
I was thinking, you know how you were talking about when you don't have sight and then you dream but you don't see anything?
Yeah.
I have a friend who goes into seizures. What were to happen if you went into a seizure but you don't have any sight?
Well, a seizure isn't sight-based entirely.
Well, because Shantae says when she's in it, it's technically where your spirit leaves your body. So when you do see things, you can see your own body and you can see the people around you. You're walking through the house that you are in. It's just everything is completely different and
Where does she?
That's creepy.
Where does she draw the
That's
seizure?
very
means?
creepy.
You're describing Doctor Strange.
Whoa, guys, calm down. Where does she draw that idea from, that a seizure is your spirit leaving your body?
Because most of the time, because technically she can see herself laying down, but then when she looks at her own body, she realizes, wait, if that's me, and this is me, then this must be my spirit, and that is my physical body. Nobody else can
She's
hear
drawing
me.
on her own experience. That's really cool.
That's creepy.
Let me just say this. I've had a lot of friends who've had seizures.
What happens if she actually
That's
walks
the
in on
first
someone when she's there in the
instance
bathroom?
I've ever heard of someone saying that their seizure was an out-of-body experience. Okay, so I would just suggest, I don't really know her, maybe that's not really a seizure, or her experience could actually be unique.
Well, because
Generally speaking, other seizure patients I know, their seizures have nothing to do with an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, because she says she twitches a lot, and when she twitches, like small twitches, that's her walking. But if they're like really fast, huge twitches, that's her running. She says most of the time I get the feeling where somebody is following me, and I turn around and I see something foggy coming towards me, and I run.
That's Jesus. She's running away from Jesus.
No. Again, I don't know her. I don't want to make any conclusions, but that's something she should get help with. I don't know if her parents are in the loop
Well,
or
she
not.
tries to
That's
take
very
pills.
creepy.
She refuses to take the pills to help her not to. Because most of the time they get really bad, where sometimes she ends up bending her body and she ends up nearly breaking her neck. Like sometimes she does a spider bend where you get up on your feet and then you bend your back like backwards. Well, sometimes she does that, but her body's bending and she doesn't have her hands down on the ground. So she's actually bending her neck, and her head is going completely touching her back.
Yeah, you're
middle of her back.
Overusing every muscle all the way down your back.
So I'm thinking she's more flexible when she's in a seizure than when she is.
Usually we stop trying when we're in pain, but if you're having a seizure, you're not really able to stop yourself the same way.
I want to stop
Well,
talking.
it sounds like if she already has medication, her parents are in on that whole deal, so that's good. But yeah, she definitely needs more help. Be there for her in those moments, because it sounds like she doesn't have control over this yet.
Well, because her mom usually doesn't really pay attention most of the time. She's like out. Yeah, she's 19, but she has a kid, so she's staying with her mom at the time. Sometimes they get super bad, and then there's like nobody there. There's times when during her seizures, she will try to get up and walk around. Like she will point at things and say words. Like sometimes in a different voice, she'll say friend or she'll say mom, and she'll point somewhere, or like she'll point to a door or point outside. I think that's her communicating with us, but I think she's doing it through something else.
Weird. Well, it does sound like she needs to be healed. That's really all there is to it.
Yeah, because she's refusing to take pills. I'm like, why don't you have pills? And she's like, I refuse to take pills. Because her mom took pills for different things and got hooked on them. And she's like, I'm not turning out to be my mom.
Well, she doesn't have to. She just needs to stay up with a good doctor. I don't know who her doctor is, but she needs to find someone who's going to walk her through this. Someone who knows what they're doing. Because that sounds like more than she can handle.
You can take pills. You just
I
don't
mean, it
wanna
is,
stay
but
on.
people think it's where she just drops down into a seizure. It's whenever
The
she
truth
falls
is,
asleep.
Jesus can heal anything. Some of my friends who had seizures no longer do, and that's because Jesus decided to heal them. It wasn't a pill. It wasn't a doctor. So every case is different. I don't know what's going to help her most, but Jesus can heal her. I know that's possible. So talk to her about Jesus.
Well, I mean, she does go to church, but
That doesn't mean everything. This room's full of people who go to church. That doesn't mean they're all Christians. That doesn't mean they're all following Jesus with their life. That's actually what we need to talk about, because we're going to run out of time. So check out with me, guys. Where did we leave off? Verse 27 goes to who? Okay, go for it. Verse 27.
Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi.
It's a good try.
What was it actually? I want to know what
Caesarea Philippi.
Woo!
That's.
These people
I'm
were
not
just
surprised
like,
I couldn't
we're gonna
pronounce that.
troll these people in the 20th century.
It's just
Name
named
it.
after Caesar Philip. Okay, that's just how you say it. Caesarea Philippi.
Well,
As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do the people say I am?"
Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say that you are one of the other prophets.
Another one.
Do you have a Bible? Oh, you don't? Dang. Okay, well, you should have a Bible. I know we haven't been reading for a little bit. And then, can you read English well or no?
Catch.
Here you go. Page 8. Why would you do that? Don't throw Bibles. Period. End of discussion. Even if someone's gonna catch it. We'll come back to you if you find your page. Okay. Can you read English or no? No. Okay. Can you?
Okay.
Page 837.
Perfect. I turned it almost right. Okay. What number are we on?
29.
Okay, 29. Then he asked them, but who do you say I am?
No, there's still more.
The next line's part of yours too.
Oh. Peter replied, you are the Messiah.
But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him.
So Jesus asked them, "Who do people think I am?" He just got done healing a blind guy, and then he did an extra miracle there that most people probably missed. The giving of all that visual memory, all that information his brain was lacking. And after he does that, basically proving he's God, because that's stuff that humans just can't do. Then he asked them, like, who do people say that I am? What do they think after I do something like that? He asked his disciples because he knows that more people are going to talk to them in a casual way. More people are going to talk to them in a normal way than are going to talk to him. And they say a few different options. These are like conspiracy theories. Oh, yeah, I think he's John the Baptist. Does anyone know why that's a weird conspiracy theory? Because at this point in the timeline, by chapter 8, John the Baptist has been beheaded. He is dead. He's been dead for a little while, actually.
Oh yeah, I thought we.
So John the Baptist was captured. He was put in prison by Herod. Herod eventually gets his head cut off. Not Herod's head. Herod gets John the Baptist's head cut off. John the Baptist is dead. Jesus is thought to be John the Baptist risen from the dead. Well, there's multiple reasons for this to be cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs to think this. Okay. First off, they're cousins. John the Baptist and Jesus were actually, well, like second cousins, but cousins. And then on top of that, John the Baptist and Jesus were publicly seen together in the same place at the same time at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry. The first public, famous, out for everyone to see thing ever that Jesus did was go get baptized by John the Baptist. And you know what? Limbo's hard. Limbo underwater, even harder. You guys know how baptism works, where you like lay someone down under the water and then you lift them back up again? Well, John did that for Jesus. Doing that to yourself and being both people, that's a magic trick right there.
Well, Jesus can do it.
Yeah. So, being the same guy as another guy who you're related to, being in the same place, then being in separate places where, like, John the Baptist was stuck with Herod, Jesus was off doing his public ministry all over the countryside, these things do not line up. This does not make a lot of sense. Okay? On top of that, John the Baptist was someone who talked about Jesus before Jesus even showed up. All this points to they knew each other, not they're the same guy. That doesn't make any sense. The second suggestion was Elijah. Does anyone know who Elijah is? Who's Elijah?
He is a prophet who lived over in the south.
Southern Kingdom?
Southern Judah.
Are you like visualizing my timeline right now? Oh, I love that. That's cool. Okay, Wednesday nights we're doing minor prophets, and Elijah is not one of them, but he's in the same time period, so I threw him on the timeline. So on Wednesday nights, as we talk about the minor prophets, they wrote the short prophetic books in the Bible. Elijah's up on the timeline. Well done. So Elijah, prophet in the Old Testament, widely regarded as the prophet who got to work the coolest miracles. You don't get much cooler than calling down fire from heaven and melting rocks into gas.
That's pretty cool.
Not liquid rock. Not like there was a puddle of magma cooling when the fire receded. No. Nothing. It consumed the rocks. Yeah, like evaporated.
Well, I mean, at least
So
that's
hot,
the same.
the rocks became fuel for the
Then
fire.
wouldn't the people
We're
have
talking like
died?
star levels of heat. Elijah got to call this down out of the sky. Andrew had a fun thought last service. He said, what if you weren't there that day? And I was like, what do you mean? Like you were just farming like one town over. And you're just, out there plowing the fields or whatever, and all of a sudden,
And it just like melts her hands.
May I ask how this
That gave me
I feel like it would have been a lot hotter that day, like a little bit later.
I know.
Just like the wind that comes at you like 30 minutes down the road.
His crops are just.
Oh gosh, what the? Probably a horrible smell. I don't know what does molten gas rock smell like?
What is
It's
that
probably
like?
got sulfur in there.
Probably hurts. Oh, I don't know.
Hey.
All right, so they think he's Elijah. Now this actually made a little bit more sense than John the Baptist. Elijah was actually prophesied to be coming back before the Messiah.
That's the Messiah's second coming, right?
Ah, see now this is it. The Bible's so cool like this. Oftentimes in the Bible, when there's a prophecy of coming events, when they tell you it's coming in advance, there's going to be a small fulfillment and then a large fulfillment. There's like a minor and a major. Okay? So the first fulfillment of the Messiah coming was Jesus' first trip to earth. This one, the one we're reading about in Mark. And even though this one was epic and amazing and a really big deal, probably the biggest deal ever since creation, it was the minor. Believe it or not, this is the minor Messiah comes to earth. The major is the end times, the end of the world. That's the major Messiah coming to earth.
But I thought before the actual Messiah comes, they call it the false something.
Oh yeah, no, lots of other things. I'm skipping to the end because we're just talking about the Messiah. But yes, lots of things happen. Go read Revelation. It's a great little timeline for it. So, but the point is when it says that Elijah is going to come before the Messiah, there was also a minor fulfillment for the minor coming of the Messiah, and then there's going to be a major fulfillment likewise. So the minor one for Jesus was, they said that John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah. That he came in the same prophetic empowerment that Elijah came in. And you're going like, that's kind of wimpy. Well, yeah, that's why it's called minor. That's the minor fulfillment. In the major fulfillment, this is better. It's so much better. Go read it. It's hilarious. Elijah comes. He's one of two prophets that come before Jesus, and they go around proclaiming the truth about Jesus, and like people who come against them, they just like burn them with fire. It's pretty epic. As like John the Baptist lives in the wilderness and eats bugs, versus prophet that just like destroys people with flames.
Fire.
Now imagine that level of difference, except it's Jesus comes and dies for all the sins of mankind. Jesus comes and pays the price for each and every one of us. Jesus comes and teaches the most moving and empowering speeches of all time, creates a religion that transforms the world, saves everyone from hell that would choose to follow him. And then the second coming is the major. Think about that for a second. That first one was the minor. Dang. So, they got close. They said, well, we think he's Elijah because he does really big miracles. Or maybe he's just one of the other prophets. Well, they weren't prophesied to be coming back from the dead anytime soon. So, that didn't make a lot of sense. Then Peter speaks up. Peter says, you're the Messiah. And he gets it right. That's literally who Jesus is. And Jesus says, yeah, but don't tell anyone. That's a weird response, okay? Like, you got it right, except you got it right, okay? Keep it down. Don't tell anyone about me. Don't tell anyone about me? That's a pretty weird request. If you're Jesus, who tries to go on vacation and ends up having to feed a few thousand people.
He doesn't want them to know that it was the coming, so that they don't get confused that it's Elijah and others.
Yeah, okay. We got to wrap this up quick because we're out of time.
Jesus, he was trying to be.
We took like an hour talking about memories.
Yeah, I know. So here's the deal. Jesus is the Messiah. The Messiah is an Old Testament word. There were Messiahs before Jesus, but they were lowercase m Messiahs. They were one of several.
Jesus is the Messiah.
The, in all caps, the, with a capital M, Messiah. Now, Messiah is a word that means anointed or chosen one. Anointing is something you would do when someone was going to become king. Before you crowned them, you would anoint them with oil. You'd spread some across their forehead, and it'd be a mark that says God has chosen you, and now he's blessing you.
Does that mean I'm the king of the church?
No.
I think you.
The crown is what gives you the authority.
Blasphemy.
It's what gives you the power. But the anointing was giving you God's blessing and showing publicly to everyone he has chosen you. So this actually happened to King David. You guys may remember the story. Before he gets crowned, he gets anointed. Same thing with Simba. Before he becomes king, he gets
I was
anointed.
gonna say that, but it was with he broke open a fruit and then just
Yeah, obviously it was different because it's a cartoon.
Yeah,
but
the
the same
adult-
idea. Before he was king,
I mean,
he got
a monkey
anointed.
Yeah, the
grabbed
adult
a lion
version,
cub
they
and
break
raised
red
it.
sticks and then take the powder from it and then cut it.
So this is the same concept. When Jesus gets called the anointed, it's different because it's meant to be God's anointed. AKA, the guy who puts the oil on your forehead ain't human. The guy who puts the oil on your forehead is God.
Wait, so the monkey's God?
Mind blown.
Going way too fast and loose with that analogy.
Well, I mean, he's
All right.
not a human.
So Jesus was not anointed on earth by humans in the sense of the humans choose him, or the humans recognize, yes, you're from God. God is empowering you and blessing you and wants you to be king. Instead, it's the other way around. God says, I'm sending you to go be king. He anoints him in heaven and he comes here to earth.
Then gets re-anointed.
The opposite.
He doesn't. He dies.
And this is why he says, but don't tell anybody. Because the other thing that was already written about the Messiah. All right. Back row. You guys get to start us up this time. Verse 31. Now that you've dropped your Bible and lost your page. I'm so sorry, dude. I didn't mean to do it like that. I was planning on having you guys read this whole time, I promise. You guys ready? Get your Bibles open? You next and next. Cool beans. So, chapter 8, verse 31, verse 32, verse 33, and then who read last?
I think it was.
I did.
You did it? Okay, so
I
you'll
did
be
not
30.
read
It's
last.
Nathan's turn.
I read
Four. I can
first.
count.
Oh yeah.
Alright, go for it. Sorry. Time out. He's reading the Bible. Some of you guys are talking. I cannot hear more than one voice at a time. It doesn't work. So try to stop yours while his goes. Go for it.
Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead.
As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and he began to reprimand him for saying such things. Go.
Shame. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, then
Reprimanded.
What?
Reprimanded.
Reprimanded Peter. Get away from me, Satan! He said, you're seeing things from merely a human's point of view, not from God's.
He is like, in his 30s though, so his voice might not.
Get away from me, Satan!
It does change the forcefulness of the statement.
He's like, get away.
All right.
Peter runs around in circles.
Sorry, that was my bad. All right, 34.
Then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, If any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross and follow me.
If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, for the sake of the good news, you will save it.
36.
Find it. Right there.
What will usually
Benefit.
benefit if you the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?
38.
For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man also will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels.
Nice. All right. Now, I got one question because we're basically out of time. If I gave you one wish, but it had to be something in this reality, no reality changing. Okay. You can go anywhere. You can have anything. You could change where you live. You could suddenly have a presidential writ that says you can have your driver's license now, and you get any car you want. You could have any amount of money. You could have infinite amount of something. You could have the biggest and best this. You could play on this certain team. You could have these people as your friends, okay? Things that are real. No time travel, you know. But just...
Time travel's real in the future.
Well, that's a paradox, because then they should be here right now. What would you have?
They are.
What would you want?
Okay,
The
is there
one
any
thing.
right
If
the money
I know.
bribe the DMV?
Yes.
I would like all my friends and all my family too, like who didn't know Christ, they all immediately become Christians.
Ooh,
But
that's
that's
a
not
good
free
one.
will,
Why
is
not
it?
the whole world? Well,
Hey,
we're not
hey,
family.
hypothetical. It's not
Yeah,
against the
exactly
rules. It's just a
right.
hypothetical. Yes.
I would, just so I can have as much faith as possible, I would like to meet Jesus face to face. If I could
Just
have
like
anything.
one quick meetup.
Yeah, just
Ooh.
just so I can
That's a good
really,
one.
really know.
You guys are better at this than I am. Yes.
If the money's like bribe the DMV to get me a driver's license,
Bribe the DMV, not even like a magic presidential writ or something.
then
Yeah.
I would take the money.
Okay, I would like all the people on TikTok to friend me and
No.
shut
All
up.
of them?
Shut up.
That seems messy. All of them.
You want
Let's
all
see.
of them to shut up?
All of them.
No, I want all the people that I'm following.
Oh, okay.
Follow me back
Okay.
and become immediate.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yes.
I would want an infinite amount of Shrek 2 on DVD.
So you could do what to it?
Shrek 2.
I would shoot it.
There's a
Absolutely.
limitless number of things
Yes.
you can do with
I would
that.
probably be playing basketball for my dream college, which probably will never happen.
But that's the point. That's the whole
What's
point
the
of the question.
dream
What's the
But
one
like
thing?
in reality, if I tried hard enough,
You could actually do that.
I may, but my shooting.
Just to give you guys a
that
hint,
way, it
if
goes
you're,
that
if you're
way.
having trouble, think of that thing you want to ask for but you can't because no one could afford it.
Someone who loves
Think of that thing you want to ask for but you can't because it's not realistic. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I would want to become Iron Man.
Become Iron Man. That's a good one.
That is
Yes.
Yes. But then you're just like, yeah.
Then you see my song.
Just heal all cancer. Okay, now imagine for a moment. I'm sorry, we're out of time. I'm sorry, boys. I'm sorry.
No.
Imagine for a moment.
Can't believe you done
Yours
this.
too. Imagine you get them. You get your wish. You get your stack of Shrek 2 to the moon. Imagine that you really do get a face-to-face with Jesus right here, right now on this earth.
You would die.
Imagine that you get your DMV driver's license early, that you get your car, that you get your Iron Man suit. Imagine you got that. It's yours. There's no strings attached.
And it all disappears.
It's yours. No.
So what's
Like good prize the DMV?
This is
Yeah,
what Jesus
what's the
says.
catch, man?
This is straight from him.
Oh,
Okay, so this is his truth. And he's not saying this to mess with you. He's not saying this to convince you. He's not saying this to change your mind. He's saying this as a warning. He says, if you seek what you want in this life and you get it, because some people do. Some people want to be rich in this life. And guess what? They do. They get to be rich. Some people want to play college ball. And they do. They get to play college ball. You seek what you want in this life and you get it. You lose the next one. You lose the next life.
No, but what if you do good at
You
that?
lose your soul in the next life. It's not up to you where it goes. He says if you want your soul to be secure, you want your soul to be yours, and you get to spend it in perfection, in eternity, you got to give up this life. That's the trade. A lot of times as Christians, we try to have both. We try to make sure we've got the next life taken care of. Okay, good, I got my check in the checkbox. I'm saved. Ha ha! Now I can focus on this life. That's not what he said. He says if you want that life, you've got to give up this one.
But what if you do good with that the thing you get?
Look at how he says it though. He says this life, the right way to live it, if you want the next one, is you cut this one off. Whoosh, and you consider it dead. The verbiage he uses is downright scary if you're back there, back in time with them. Follow me on this. The verbiage he used, the words he said to them were scary because this is the first time he said cross to them. Now, cross was a famous form of torturous death back then, but he hasn't mentioned it yet until right here, right now. And he didn't mention it happening to himself. He mentioned it happening to them.
It was like the worst way to die, wasn't it?
It was. He says, if you want to follow me, you want to come after me, you want to go to heaven with me, you pick up your means of death that will torture you, your cross, you pick that up, and you bring it with you as you follow me. What he is saying is you have to be ready for the worst possible this life. Then you're ready for the best possible next life. That's crazy. Now, they may not have realized yet, and maybe they would get it later, but if they're following him and they've all got their own cross, they're not following him straight to heaven. There's a little detour, because Jesus has his own cross he's going to go die on. So as he leads them, as they follow, the first stop, well, he shows them how it's done. He goes, he dies on the cross. And see, this is the beautiful twist in the story. He doesn't say, be a Christian, die now. He doesn't say that. He says, be a Christian, let this life be considered dead to you. Do not live for this life. Do not live like this life is the one that matters. Do not live like this is your life. This is not. This is the prelude. This is the little prologue as the book opens. Yeah, it's okay. That's kind of the point. It's often we're skipping. He says this isn't the real deal. The next life is the real deal. Put your eyes on the next one. And then, this is the beautiful part. When he died, he didn't stay dead. He came back to life. And that's the picture for us. That's the example we're supposed to follow. He doesn't say, be a Christian, die now. He says, be a Christian, cut off the old life, treat it as if it were dead, and now as you continue to live, because you're not dead, take this life as if it was a brand new one. Make sure this person you are now and that person you were then don't even know each other. Make them that separate.
So Daniel?
Yeah.
So that means that if you believe in him, that's just the first part, but to get to feel like the best in heaven, you want to...
You have to feel like the best.
I mean, not like that, not like that, not like that.
Sure. You could look at it from different motivational standpoints.
I mean, I don't mean it like be the best. I mean, like to feel good about yourself.
I don't even think that's the motivation. It's because Jesus asked you to.
I know you did.
And he's saying it's the best.
Then why do we work so hard to get to tell people about it if this life is dead to us?
Tell people about what?
Jesus. Like, why do we work so hard on that?
Because
But
that's
if
not
it's
locked up
this.
only in this life. That goes beyond this life. Does that make sense? His focus wasn't no life. He wasn't saying skip this life and skip everything else. He was saying this life isn't the focus because the next one is. Eternity is the focus. Does that make sense? We tell people about Jesus, we spend so much time and effort on that because that is how they get to find out how to have eternity. That's how they get to find out how to be with Jesus. Is that making any sense? Okay, we got to wrap up. I love you guys. The point of what Jesus was trying to say was that focusing on this life is easy, and it's what everyone usually does. But it doesn't get you the next life. Focusing on him. That's what brings you to the next life. That's what gets you to heaven, is Jesus being the first and the foremost in your life. Giving your life to him. Following him with everything you've got. He said, how much? Even with your death. Follow him even unto death. Because if your whole life here is all wrapped up in him, then when someone makes fun of you for being a Christian, that won't bother you. Your whole point was to be noticed that you were a Christian. That was the goal. So when someone makes fun of you for that, you won. Congratulations. You aced the test. When someone wants to hurt you because you're a Christian, when someone wants to kill you because you're a Christian, congratulations. You look 1% like Jesus. Just enough they want to do to you what they did to him. That's how Paul looked at it. He says, I count everything joy, and I count my sufferings as joy too, because they're going to treat me like they treated Jesus.
That's royalty.
That's royalty. Oh, I like that.
Oh, look at me, I'm new king. Hey, all of you felt no.
All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you're treating us with such kindness, bringing this truth to us through your word. We thank you that you love us that much. Help us to continue to learn from your Son through the Gospel of Mark. And help us to lock this truth in our heart, Lord, that this life is not the real one. This is the prologue. Help us, Lord, to really treat eternity as the one we're living for. To really treat you as what we're living for, and not ourselves. Help us, Lord, to wake up each time this week when we find ourselves being selfish. To pray in those instances and ask for your strength, to ask for your correction. And Lord, may we not be spiritually blind and deaf like the disciples were at that time. May you open our eyes, open our ears, help us to take in everything you have for us. With our heads bowed, with our eyes closed, there's anyone here this morning that's never before reached out to Jesus and said, I want to follow you. If you've never before said to him, forgive my sins, make me clean, I want a life with you. If you've never done that before, but you want to do it right now, I'm just going to ask you to raise up a hand so I can see it. I can't see your heart. I don't know exactly what you're going through, but God can, and he does. So if you want to talk to him right now and ask for that forgiveness and that eternal life, you can do it. Just raise up your hand. Anyone this morning? All right, Lord, I thank you so much for these junior hires. Bless them as they go. Continue to use them. I pray that in your name, Jesus. Amen. Love you guys. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Next week will be different because it will be my birthday.
Yay!
What?
Yeah.
I may not be here next week, but I'll be moving into my new house. That's good.
We did it.
I
What
won't
would it
be
be?
on the couch anymore.
Thank
You're
you.
supposed to-
Who, what
That's
would
gonna be
Also,
nice.
fun fact, if you guys meet anybody who's 60 years old this week, they are 1% through the human experience. Do you guys know that?
What do you mean?
60-year-olds have been alive for 1% of mankind's existence. Isn't that weird?
Really?
Yeah?
Oh my god.
So what if
60
you
years
were
old,
what if
1%?
you were 120 years old? What if you
2%. There you go. I'm 30, so I'm a 0.5%.
That's cheaper.
Yep.
That's
1/200th of the human experience right here.
That's insane.
Isn't that strange?
That's really
It feels so small.
I know.
Can we do phone bucket?
No.
What
He
if
said
I'm
no.
like
Why do
one
you
of the
ask?
first ones
I
out?
was gonna say
Even I quit my phone.
My phone was
Wait,
plugged.
no,
I was
Oh, look at tight.
Which one's
What?
my phone?
There's a sandwich going on.
My phone was
I
plugged.
can't mix it up.
No, this one wins.
Oh!
It was stuck between them. It got rescued.
Yes. Where's my phone? I never liked it anyway.
My phone was anything but for a dollar.
A lot of notifications.
Love you guys. Get on out of here. They've actually just started asking me. The beer was too short for a little while. Bye-bye. Bye, boys. I really wish I got to hear your wishes. I wish I got to hear your wishes. That's a good one.
I just know you previously said that, you said Xbox controllers. Well, you said that before, like, you had to shave every day.
Because Emily doesn't want to kiss me on my face.
No.
We've been sick lately.
Well,
And
yeah,
so we haven't
I
shared kisses very often,
figured
so
that.
she likes looking at it. What's that? What's that? Oh! I was like, why are you throwing money at me? I don't get it. Why are you shaking ice cream at me? That's like a crime in 6 countries.
You don't want to make that neck.
That's not how thievery works. Thievery is where I cut off your head.
Nothing new on okay.
Hey, what's up?
Nothing much. Just trying to get this done. What I can't do on Fortnite at all.
Why can't you do Fortnite?
People, because I'm using an Xbox S, so everyone's hacking. So
Yeah.
I say, you
you get to the final 10, you just get wiped